The U-60 Black Hawk dropped through cloud cover like a stone, rotors beating against wind that carried the promise of a Montana winter. 15 below zero at ground level, 20 below up here. Master Sergeant Joanna Merrick sat alone in the cargo bay, hands folded over a worn canvas pack, watching the white expanse of Fort Redstone Military Reservation materialize through the portside window. Mountains rose from the plains in jagged teeth. Pine forests stretched dark and infinite. Snow covered everything else. She had not spoken a word since wheels up from Fort Bragg 12 hours ago. The crew chief signaled 2 minutes. Joe tightened the straps on her pack and stood. She wore standard issue battle dress uniform, forest pattern, pressed and clean. No patches, no combat infantryman badge, no unit insignia. The name tape over her right breast pocket read MERRICK in black thread. The rank tab on her collar showed 3 chevrons up, 3 rockers down. Master Sergeant. 14 years of service compressed into cloth and thread. Everything important about her had been removed. The helicopter touched down on the landing pad outside the operations complex. Rotor wash kicked up a whirlwind of ice crystals that caught the afternoon sun and turned the air into glittering chaos. Joe stepped down onto concrete, pack slung over one shoulder and ducked beneath the spinning blades. The crew chief gave her a thumbs up. She nodded once. The Black Hawk lifted away, banking hard toward the south, leaving her alone in the cold. Fort Redstone stretched before her, a collection of prefabricated buildings, training ranges, and obstacle courses scattered across 40 square miles of wilderness. The Mountain Warfare Training Center, where the Army sent its best to learn how to fight in terrain that would kill the unprepared, where special operations candidates came to prove they belonged among the elite, where legends were built or broken against rock and ice and altitude. Joe started walking toward the main complex. She made it 30 yards before someone noticed her. A group of soldiers stood outside an equipment shed, loading gear into the back of a tactical vehicle. All men, all young, mid-20s, maybe 30, hard bodies and harder attitudes. They wore patrol caps and fleece jackets against the cold. One of them, tall with a square jaw and the confident posture of someone who had never truly failed at anything, looked up as she approached. Sergeant Leon Briggs. She had read his file on the flight, 28 years old, Ranger qualified, Airborne qualified, top of his class in every school, already recommended for Special Forces assessment and selection. The kind of soldier who made the Army look good in recruiting videos. Also the kind of soldier who had never been told no by anyone wearing fewer stripes than him. Briggs watched her approach with the casual assessment of a predator sizing up prey. His eyes tracked from her clean uniform to her empty sleeve where a combat patch should be, from her unscuffed boots to her smaller frame, from her tied-back hair to the notepad visible in her cargo pocket. He smiled, not friendly. "Ma'am," he said, stepping into her path, "you lost. Transportation office is back at main post. This is the training area." Joe stopped 3 feet from him, looked at his face, said nothing. Briggs glanced at his team, who had stopped loading gear to watch. One of them, a corporal with a shaved head, grinned. Briggs turned back to Joe, that same smile still playing at the corners of his mouth. "Seriously, ma'am, you look like you need admin. This is where we do the real work." Joe reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out a folded set of orders, held them out without a word. Briggs took them, unfolded, read. The smile faded. "You are the SOCOM evaluator. You are here to observe Tier 1 selection." Joe did not answer, just kept looking at him with eyes the color of winter sky, flat, unreadable, patient. Briggs read the orders again as if hoping the words would change. They did not. He looked back at her, and now there was something else in his expression. Confusion, disbelief. the first stirrings of resentment that would grow into something uglier in the days ahead. "Captain Garrett is expecting me," Joe said, first words she had spoken since landing. Her voice was quiet, low, the kind of voice that did not need to be raised to be heard. "Right." Briggs folded the orders and handed them back, stepped aside. "He is in the operations center, Building 6. Joe took the orders, slipped them back into her pocket, walked past without another word. Behind her, she heard one of the soldiers mutter something. Laughter, low and mean. She did not turn around, did not acknowledge it, just kept walking across the snow-covered ground toward a cluster of buildings marked with numbers painted on their sides. Building 6 was heated. That was the first thing she noticed. The second was the man standing at the operations board, studying a map of the surrounding terrain with the focused intensity of someone planning a war. Captain Ellis Garrett, 36 years old, Ranger tabbed, 2 deployments to Afghanistan, 1 to Syria, currently Assistant Training Director for the Mountain Warfare Training Center. His file said he was competent, professional, and skeptical of anyone who had not earned their place through blood and sweat in the same mud he had. He looked up as she entered, did a double take. His eyes went to her rank, her clean uniform, her absence of any indicator that she belonged here. "Master Sergeant Merrick." "Sir." Garrett walked over, hand extended. She shook it. His grip was firm, testing. She matched it without effort. He released, studying her face with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "You are younger than I expected." "Yes, sir." "And shorter." "Yes, sir." "And female." Joe said nothing. Garrett crossed his arms. "SOCOM sent you to evaluate our training program. That is what the message said. Observe and assess. Provide recommendations. That about cover it." "Yes, sir." "You ever been through a selection course, Master Sergeant?" "Yes, sir." "Which one?" "Classified, sir." Garrett's jaw tightened. "Of course it is." He turned back to the operations board, studying the map as if it held answers she would not give. "Lieutenant Colonel Strand wants to meet you. He runs this program, built it from the ground up. He is not happy about SOCOM sending someone to look over his shoulder." "Understood, sir." "I am not happy about it either, if I am being honest." Joe waited. Garrett glanced at her. "You got a problem with honesty, Master Sergeant?" "No, sir, I prefer it." "Good." He grabbed a patrol cap from the desk. "Come on, let us get this over with." They walked across the compound toward a larger building at the center of the training area. The headquarters. Through windows, Joe could see soldiers moving inside, preparing for something. She had read the training schedule, knew what was coming. 42 candidates, 3 weeks of hell. Only the hardest would pass. Only the best would earn their place among the special operations community. That was the theory, anyway. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Strand stood in his office like a man defending territory. 46 years old, with the weathered face of someone who had spent half his life in places that did not appear on tourist maps. 2 combat tour in Iraq. Silver Star for valor. Respected by his peers. Feared by his students. A man who had built his reputation on turning raw soldiers into weapons the enemy learned to fear. He looked at Joe the way a wolf looks at something that does not belong in its forest. "Master Sergeant." His voice was gravel and iron. "Captain Garrett tells me you are here to evaluate my program." "Yes, sir." "You qualified to do that?" "SOCOM believes so, sir." Strand walked around his desk, stopping close enough that most people would have taken a step back. Joe did not move, did not blink, just met his gaze with that same flat calm she had shown Briggs. "I have been running this program for 4 years," Strand said. 93% of our graduates pass their first operational deployment evaluation. 87% are selected for advanced special operations training. This is the best mountain warfare program in the Department of Defense. You understand that? Yes, sir. Then you understand why I might question why SOCOM thinks we need evaluation by someone whose service record is completely redacted. Joe said nothing. Strand leaned closer. "You got combat experience, Master Sergeant. You ever had someone try to kill you? You ever had to make a decision that meant your people lived or died?" The silence stretched. Garrett shifted uncomfortably by the door. "I have, sir," Joe said finally, quiet certain. "When?" "Classified, sir." Strand's jaw worked. He stepped back, studying her with new intensity, looking for cracks, weaknesses, any sign that she was what he suspected. A headquarters bureaucrat sent to justify budget cuts or push political agendas or undermine programs that actually worked. He found nothing in her face to confirm any of it. "You will observe," he said. "You will not interfere. You will not offer opinions to my instructors or my candidates. You will sit in the corner with your laptop and your notepad, and when this cycle is over, you will write your report and you will leave. Are we clear?" "Crystal, sir." "Good." He walked back to his desk, dismissing her with his posture. "Captain Garrett will show you where you are staying. Training begins at 0500. Do not be late." Outside, the temperature had dropped another 5 degrees. Joe followed Garrett across the compound toward a row of billets at the far edge of the complex, separate from the candidate barracks, separate from the instructor quarters, away from everyone. Garrett stopped at the last building. "This one is yours. It is not much. Heat works, shower works, that is about it." He paused, studying her again with that same puzzled expression. "Can I ask you something, Master Sergeant?" "Yes, sir." "Why are you really here?" Joe looked at him for a long moment. Behind them, the sun was starting its descent behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and blood. "To observe, sir, like the colonel said." "And that is it, just observe." "That is it." Garrett did not believe her. She could see it in his eyes, but he was professional enough not to push. He nodded toward the billet. "Get some rest. Tomorrow starts early." Joe watched him walk away, then entered the small building. One room, one bed, one desk with a lamp, a window that looked out at nothing but trees and snow and darkness gathering between them. She set her pack on the bed, unzipped it. Inside were the things she was allowed to carry: uniforms, toiletries, a laptop with security protocols that made Fort Knox look accessible, and at the bottom, wrapped in black cloth, a single photograph. She did not take it out, did not need to. She had memorized every detail years ago. 11 faces smiling at a camera, brothers and sisters in arms, warriors who had trusted her, followed her, believed in her. All of them dead now, because someone had made assumptions, because someone had dismissed intelligence from a source that did not fit their expectations, because arrogance and prejudice had blinded good soldiers to the truth standing right in front of them. She zipped the pack closed, sat on the bed, looked out the window at the mountains turning black against the dying light. This was why she was here. Not to evaluate equipment or assess training protocols or justify budget line items. She was here to answer one question that kept her awake most nights. Would they make the same mistake again? 0500 came faster than biology wanted. Joe was already awake, had been for an hour standing outside in the dark, letting the cold work its way into her bones. -20 now. Wind chill made it worse. Her breath came in white clouds that vanished into blackness. Above her, stars burned with the savage clarity of high altitude and thin air. She heard them before she saw them. 42 candidates emerging from their barracks, moving in formation toward the physical training area. Their breath created a fog bank that rolled ahead of them. They wore standard PT uniforms, shorts and T-shirts in -20 degrees. First test of the day. Could they function when their bodies screamed at them to quit? Joe followed at a distance. Watched from the edge of the training area as instructors put them through hell. Push-ups in the snow, flutter kicks until core muscles failed, sprints up a hill that had no mercy. Soldiers vomited, collapsed, got back up, kept going. Briggs was among them, leading from the front, setting the pace, showing the younger candidates how it was done. He was good. She could see that, fast, strong, mentally tough, the kind of soldier who made it look easy. That was his weakness. He had never learned how hard things could be. After PT, they moved to the classroom. Tactics, terrain analysis, mission planning. Joe sat in the back corner as Strand had ordered, laptop open, taking notes. The candidates occasionally glanced her way, some with curiosity, most with the same dismissive assessment Briggs had given her. A headquarters type, a box checker, someone who would never understand what they were going through. Let them think that. Garrett taught the morning session. He was better at it than Joe had expected. Clear, concise, focused on real-world application rather than doctrine. He used examples from his own combat deployments, talked about mistakes he had made and what they had cost. The candidates listened with the respect earned through shared hardship. He never looked at Joe, never acknowledged her presence. But twice, when he made a point about adapting to unexpected variables, his voice changed in a way that suggested the lesson was meant for more than just the candidates. At 1000 hours, they moved to the rifle range. Long-distance marksmanship, 800 meters, wind blowing hard from the northwest, cold that made metal painful to touch, conditions that separated good shooters from great ones. Joe watched from behind the firing line as candidates took their positions, adjusting for wind, calculating drop, controlling their breathing. Briggs went first, 5 rounds at a man-sized target so far away it looked like a postage stamp. 4 hits, 1 near miss. Instructor nodded approval. More candidates followed, some better, most worse. It was technical work, requiring patience and precision and the kind of calm that only came from hundreds of hours behind the trigger. Then Garrett approached her. "Master Sergeant, come take a look at the targets, get a closer view of what we are teaching." It was not a request. Joe stood, walked forward to the observation position directly behind the firing line, close enough to hear the rifle bolts working, close enough to smell gun oil and cold metal and the sharp chemical signature of burned powder, close enough to feel the concussion of each shot as it left the barrel. She stood there, hands at her sides, face neutral, but Garrett was watching her carefully. He saw what the others did not, the way her jaw tightened, the way her eyes tracked not to the targets downrange but to the soldiers behind the rifles, the way her breathing changed just slightly, becoming more controlled, more deliberate. The way someone breathes when they are managing old trauma that never quite goes away. "Something wrong, Master Sergeant?" Garrett asked quietly. "No, sir." "You look uncomfortable." "I am fine, sir." But she was not fine. Something about this place, this range, this specific combination of cold and distance, and the sound of high-powered rifles sending lead downrange at velocity. Something about it pulled at threads she had buried deep. Another shot, another hit, more candidates proving their competence. Joe endured it, said nothing. gave nothing away. But when the training session ended and Garrett dismissed the candidates to lunch, she walked away from the range faster than necessary. Not running, not panicking, just putting distance between herself and whatever ghosts lived in the sound of gunfire at altitude. Garrett caught up to her halfway to the operations center. "Master Sergeant, hold up." She stopped, turned. "You had a reaction back there," Garrett said. "At the range, I saw it." "I had no reaction, sir." "You did, small, but it was there." He studied her face. "You got history with long guns, bad experience." "My history is classified, sir." "Right, of course." Frustration edged his voice. "Everything about you is classified, your deployments, your training, your actual job. SOCOM just sends you here and expects us to trust that you know what you are looking at." Joe met his eyes. "Captain Garrett, you do not have to trust me. You just have to let me do my job." "And what is your job exactly?" "To observe." "That is it, just observe." She did not answer, just held his gaze until he looked away first. That night Garrett made a phone call, secured line, encrypted, to a contact he had at SOCOM headquarters, someone who owed him a favor from their time in Afghanistan, someone with access to personnel records that did not officially exist. "I need information on a master sergeant," Garrett said. "Joanna E. Merrick, everything you can find." "Spell the last name." Garrett did. Silence on the line, the sound of typing, then a long pause. "I got nothing," his contact said. "Nothing? How is that possible?" "I mean, I got a name, a rank, a service number, but everything else is redacted, and I mean everything. Her entire service record is blocked at 06 clearance level. I cannot even see what branch she started in." "Why would that be?" "Only two reasons. Either she is working special operations at the highest levels, or she did something that got her entire record classified for operational security." "Which one is it?" "Brother, if I could tell you that, it would not be classified." His contact paused. "But I can tell you this. That level of redaction does not happen for people pushing paper. That happens for people who do things the Army does not want anyone knowing about." Garrett hung up, sat in his office staring at nothing, thinking about the way Merrick had stood at the rifle range, the way her hands had been steady while everything else about her body language screamed discomfort, the way she spoke in short sentences that gave away nothing. Who was she? The question kept him awake most of the night. Day 4 brought land navigation. 12 teams, 4 soldiers each, dropped into the wilderness with a map, compass, and a grid coordinate 20 kilometers away through terrain that wanted to kill them. Points would be deducted for every minute past the time hack. Teams that got lost or failed to finish would be removed from the program. Joe was assigned to Team 11, 3 candidates who had struggled in previous phases, the weakest performers, the ones most likely to fail. An obvious setup. Put the observer with the failures. Let her see what happens when soldiers are not good enough. The team leader was a young specialist named Chen, 23 years old, smart but lacking confidence. He looked at Joe with the nervous respect of someone who did not know how to interact with female NCOs above his pay grade. "Ma'am, have you done land nav before?" "Yes." "In terrain like this?" "Similar." Chen nodded, not sure what to make of that answer. The other 2 team members, both privates fresh from basic training, looked at Joe like she was an alien who had wandered into their test by mistake. Garrett briefed all the teams at the start point. "You have 8 hours. Navigate to the objective, mark your arrival time, navigate back. Do not get lost. Do not freeze to death. Do not make me come find you. The teams moved out in 15-minute intervals. Team 11 went last. Chen studied the map with the intensity of someone taking a calculus exam, plotted a course, checked it twice, started leading them through the forest along a ridgeline that looked reasonable on paper but turned brutal in practice. Steep slopes, deadfall timber, snow deep enough to make every step a battle. Joe walked at the back of the formation, silent, watching. After an hour, they were already behind schedule. Chen had missed a turn, led them down a drainage that added 2 kilometers to their route. He realized his mistake and started to panic, voice getting higher, movements becoming jerky and uncertain. "We need to cut back east," he said, pointing at the map. "We can make up time if we go straight up this slope." One of the privates looked at the slope in question. 60-degree angle, ice-covered rocks, no obvious route. "That is going to be rough, Specialist." "We do not have a choice. We are already 30 minutes behind." They started climbing. It was worse than it looked. Loose rock hidden under snow, ice sheets that sent soldiers sliding backward. By the time they reached the top, they had burned another 40 minutes and everyone was exhausted. Joe had not said a word. Chen looked back at her, frustration and desperation mixing in his eyes. "Ma'am, if you know a better way, now would be a good time to say something." Joe looked at him, then at the map he held, then at the terrain stretching ahead of them. "Not my job," she said. "What?" "To tell you, you are the team leader, Lade." Chen stared at her. Anger flashed across his face. "So you are just going to let us fail?" "If that is what happens." "That is bullshit, ma'am. If you know something, you should say it." Joe took one step toward him, close enough that he had to look up to meet her eyes. "Specialist Chen, you want to know what I know? Fine. I know that in combat you will not have someone holding your hand. You will not have someone telling you the right answer. You will make decisions with incomplete information and live with the consequences. So make your decision. Lead your team or quit." Chen's jaw worked. He was young, inexperienced, but he was not stupid. He saw something in her eyes that made him understand. This was the test, not the navigation, not the terrain, the willingness to make hard choices and own them. He nodded, looked back at his map, made a new plan, led them forward. They arrived at the objective 3 hours late, dead last. Garrett was waiting with a stopwatch and disappointment written across his face. Team 11, late by 172 minutes. That is a failing score. Chen stood at attention, defeated. "Yes, sir." Garrett looked at Joe. "Master Sergeant, you have any observations to share?" "No, sir." "You just watched them fail and said nothing." "They needed to learn, sir." "Learn what?" "How to fail." Garrett's expression hardened, but before he could respond, Joe walked past him toward the extraction vehicle, left the team standing there with their shame and their questions, and their slowly dawning understanding that maybe this observer was something more than they had assumed. That night, Garrett reviewed the GPS tracks from all 12 teams, standard procedure, made sure no one had cheated, verified routes taken, identified learning points. Team 11's track stopped him cold. For the first 15 minutes, their route was perfect, optimal, the most efficient path through the terrain that would have put them ahead of schedule. Then the track deviated, followed Chen's poor decisions through difficult terrain, lost time, lost distance. But those first 15 minutes, someone on that team had known the right way, had led them perfectly, then stopped. Only one person fit that profile. Garrett pulled up Merrick's personnel file again, stared at all those redacted lines, all that classified information, All those gaps where a career should be visible. Who the hell was she? Day 7 brought the announcement everyone had been dreading. Final exercise, 48-hour SERE simulation, survival, evasion, resistance, escape, the culminating event that separated candidates who could endure from candidates who would break. Lieutenant Colonel Strand stood before the assembled candidates in the briefing hall. Behind him, a large map showed the operations area, 100 square kilometers of mountain wilderness. No shelter, no resupply, limited equipment, and somewhere in that frozen hell, 15 OPFOR hunters with night vision, tracking dogs and orders to capture anyone they found. You will be inserted at various points throughout the AO, Strand said. Your objective is to reach the extraction point 30 kilometers south within 48 hours. You will evade OPFOR. If captured, you will resist interrogation. You will not quit. 50% of you will fail this exercise. Those who pass will move to the final phase. Those who fail will return to their units. He paused. Let the weight of that sink in. This is not training anymore. This is as close to the real thing as we can make it without actual bullets. You will be cold, hungry, exhausted, hunted. And in those moments when every part of you wants to quit, you will discover what you are actually made of. The room was silent. Strand's eyes found Joe sitting in the back corner. Master Sergeant Merrick, you requested to observe this exercise. Yes, sir. No, his voice cut like a blade. You will participate. 42 heads turned to look at her. Sir, Garrett said carefully, Master Sergeant Merrick is here as an evaluator, not a candidate. Then she can evaluate from inside the exercise, Strand said. You want to assess my program. Do it from the same position as my candidates. Experience what they experience. Or are you afraid you cannot handle it? It was a challenge, public, deliberate, designed to put her in an impossible position. Refuse and look weak. Accept and almost certainly fail in a way that would undermine whatever authority SOCOM thought she had. Joe stood. I accept, sir. A ripple of surprise went through the room. Briggs, sitting in the front row, smiled, not friendly, anticipatory, like a cat that had just cornered prey. Outstanding, Strand said. You will be inserted with the other candidates tomorrow at 0600. Same equipment, same rules, same time limit. Good luck, Master Sergeant. You are going to need it. That night Joe sat alone in her billet. Outside, temperature had dropped to -25. Wind howled through the trees, carrying snow and ice and the promise of something worse coming. She opened her pack, took out the photograph she had not looked at since arriving. 11 faces, young, confident, unaware of what was waiting for them in the mountains of Afghanistan. She had been like them once, certain of her abilities, trusting the system, believing that competence and courage were enough. Then she had watched them die because someone in command had dismissed intelligence from a local woman, dismissed it because the source did not fit their expectations, because she was female, Afghan, outside their frame of reference. So they ignored her warnings and walked into an ambush that should never have happened. Joe had survived, barely. 11 others had not. She put the photograph away, checked her gear with the methodical precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Rifle, ammunition, water, medical kit, navigation tools, everything she would need to survive in an environment designed to break her. But the gear was not the test. It never was. The test was what happened when everything went wrong and you had to decide who you were going to be in the darkness. She already knew that answer. 0600 came with snow falling heavy and wind turning the world white. 42 candidates and one master sergeant stood on the tarmac as helicopters spun up. They would be dropped in groups of 3 across the operations area. Scattered, alone, left to navigate and survive on their own. Jo climbed into the helicopter with 2 specialists she had never spoken to. Young men who looked at her with barely concealed contempt. A female master sergeant joining their proving ground. An administrator playing soldier. Someone who would slow them down. Let them think that. The helicopter lifted into the storm. Wind buffeted the airframe. Snow reduced visibility to nothing. The crew chief pointed at the GPS. 3 minutes to drop. 2 minutes. 1. The helicopter flared hard. Crew chief opened the door, screamed over the rotor noise. Go, go, go. The 2 specialists jumped, disappeared into the white. Jo followed. She hit snow 2 feet deep and rolled, came up in a crouch. The helicopter was already gone, sound vanishing into the storm. She was alone on a mountainside with wind that felt like knives and cold that wanted to kill her. Good. She checked her GPS, verified her position, plotted a route, not the obvious one, not the fastest one, the smart one, the one that used terrain to her advantage, the one that would keep her invisible. Then she disabled the GPS tracker, carefully, without triggering the tamper alarm, a trick she had learned from people who needed to move through the world without leaving traces. By the time OPFOR started hunting, she would already be a ghost. 6 hours into the exercise, Briggs and his team were making good time. They had covered 12 kilometers, avoided 2 OPFOR patrols, set a pace that put them ahead of schedule. Briggs was confident, in his element. This was what he had trained for. Then they found the tracker. It was attached to a bull elk moving north, away from the objective, away from the extraction point, moving fast through heavy timber where no human could follow. Briggs stared at it, pulled the small electronic device from the animal's fur and turned it over in his hands. Read the serial number. Unit 47, Master Sergeant Merrick's tracker. What the hell? One of his teammates said. Briggs looked at the elk, which was staring at them with profound disinterest before bounding away into the forest. She played us, Briggs said quietly. She put her tracker on an animal. She is out there somewhere without any way to track her. Can you do that? Is that allowed? I do not know, but she did it. Briggs looked south toward the extraction point, then north where the elk had gone. She is not amateur. Whoever she is, she knows what she is doing. For the first time since Merrick had arrived, Sergeant Leon Briggs felt doubt creep into his confidence. Night fell like a hammer. Temperature plummeted to -30. Wind chill made it worse. This was the kind of cold that killed, that shut down extremities and clouded judgment and made people make fatal mistakes. Briggs and his team had managed to build a shelter in a ravine, small, crude, but better than nothing. They huddled together for warmth. No fire. Fire would give away their position. OPFOR had thermal imaging. Any heat signature bigger than a human body would draw them like moths. They ate cold rations, shivered, tried to sleep in shifts. Then they heard dogs. Distant but getting closer. The baying of tracking hounds that had found a scent, coming from the north, moving toward them with the inevitability of an avalanche. They are 300 meters out, one of Briggs's teammates said, listening. Maybe less, we need to move. If we move now, they will see our tracks in the snow, fresh tracks, they will follow. So what do we do? Briggs did not have an answer. This was the moment where theory met reality, where training met actual consequences. He was good, but he had never faced this specific combination of variables. never had to make this exact choice. Then a figure emerged from the darkness. Silent, no warning. One moment the forest was empty. The next, someone was standing 3 feet from their shelter, a shape in black, no visible breath, no sound of movement, just presence where nothing had been before. Briggs's hand went to his rifle. His teammates scrambled up, ready to fight or run. The figure stepped into the dim light. Master Sergeant Joanna Merrick, snow covering her shoulders but nowhere else. Uniform dry, face calm, no pack visible. In her hands 3 snowshoe hares, already gutted and cleaned. Briggs stared. How did you, what the? Joe tossed the hares at his feet. Dogs hunt by thermal signature and scent. Fire creates smoke. Smoke gives away position. Eat cold. She turned to leave. Wait, Briggs said, finding his voice. Where did you come from? Where is your gear? How are you not freezing? Joe looked back at him. In the darkness, her eyes caught what little light existed and reflected it back like an animal. You are too loud, she said, quiet, certain. You will be caught by dawn. Then help us, come with us. She shook her head. You would slow me down. Slow you down? Briggs's pride overrode his shock. We are ahead of schedule. We are leading this whole exercise. You were until you stopped here, until you made noise setting up shelter, until you left tracks the dogs can follow. Joe glanced north where the baying was getting louder. You have maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. So what should we do? Joe studied him for a long moment. In that look was assessment, judgment, the weighing of potential against reality. She was deciding something, whether to help or whether to let him learn the hard way. Run south, she said finally. Fast as you can, create distance. They will catch you, but maybe not tonight. And you? I will not be caught. Briggs wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers, wanted to understand how a small, quiet master sergeant who looked like she belonged behind a desk was standing in -30 weather without showing any signs of cold or fear or doubt. But the dogs were closer now. Time for questions was over. Thank you, he said, for the rabbits, for the advice. Joe nodded once. Then she did something that would haunt Briggs for the rest of his life. She smiled. Not friendly, not warm, something else. Something that suggested she knew things he could not imagine, had seen things he had only read about, was capable of things that would make his impressive service record look like a participation trophy. Then she turned and walked into the forest. Briggs watched her go, watched her become a shadow, then a suggestion, then nothing at all. Gone. As if she had never been there. One of his teammates whispered, "What the hell is she?" Briggs did not answer, because he did not know, but he was starting to suspect that Master Sergeant Joanna Merrick was not an evaluator, not an observer, not any of the things they had assumed. She was something else entirely. The dogs found their position 20 minutes later. They ran, hard and fast through terrain that wanted to break them. The dogs followed. OPFOR followed. By dawn, Briggs and his team were exhausted, scattered, and 2 of them had been captured. But they were alive, and they had seen something that changed how they understood the world. They had seen a ghost walk through fire and vanish into smoke. And somewhere in the frozen mountains, where no tracker could follow and no hunter could find, Master Sergeant Joanna Merrick moved through the darkness like water through stone. Invisible, inevitable, unstoppable. The question was no longer whether she would pass the exercise. The question was what else she was capable of, and why SOCOM had sent her to their mountain in the first place. Dawn came without warmth. The sun rose over mountains that looked like broken teeth, casting long shadows across snow that had turned the world into a study in black and white. No colors, no softness, just the hard geometry of survival rendered in ice and stone, and the thin air that made every breath a conscious decision. In the operations center at Fort Redstone, Captain Ellis Garrett stood before a digital map that showed the disposition of forces across 100 square kilometers of wilderness. Red dots represented OPFOR hunter teams. Blue dots represented candidates still in the field. Each dot had a designation, a status, a story of success or failure written in coordinates and timestamps. 18 blue dots had turned gray, captured, out of the exercise. 24 remained active, and 1 dot was missing entirely. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Strand walked up behind Garrett, coffee in hand, eyes tracking across the display with the focused intensity of a predator studying prey patterns. His face showed the wear of a man who had not slept, who had spent the night monitoring radio traffic and GPS feeds and trying to understand what was happening in his carefully controlled training environment. "Status," he said, single word, command voice. Garrett did not turn around. 8 more captures overnight. Briggs' team evaded contact but lost 2 members to hypothermia. They are at the casualty collection point receiving medical treatment. The rest are still moving toward the extraction zone, but OPFOR has them boxed into a narrow corridor. They will be captured within the next 6 hours. And Merrick? Still no signal, sir. Strand set his coffee down with the careful precision of someone controlling anger. How is that possible? The trackers are designed to be tamper-resistant. They should trigger an alarm if removed or disabled. Yes, sir, they should. But hers did not. No, sir. Strand studied the map, thinking, calculating, running scenarios through a mind trained to anticipate enemy movement and counter it. OPFOR found her tracker on an elk, moving north, away from the objective. Yes, sir. So either she is moving south without her tracker, which means she disabled it without triggering the alarm, or she is somewhere else entirely doing something we have not anticipated. Garrett finally turned to look at his commanding officer. Sir, with respect, I think we need to consider the possibility that Master Sergeant Merrick is not what we assumed she is. Meaning her service record is redacted at the 06 level, meaning she knew the optimal route on the land navigation exercise but deliberately stayed silent, meaning she disabled a tamper-resistant tracker without setting off any alarms, meaning she is surviving in -30° weather better than our best candidates. Garrett paused. Sir, I think she might actually be here to evaluate us. Not the program, us. How we respond to variables we cannot predict or control. Strand looked at him for a long moment. Behind his eyes, something shifted. Acceptance of a possibility he did not want to consider. You think SOCOM is testing whether we can adapt? I think SOCOM sent someone who does not fit any profile we recognize, and is watching to see if we make assumptions that get people killed. Before Strand could respond, a radio crackled to life on the operations desk. OPFOR Team Alpha, voice tight with confusion and something that might have been embarrassment. Command, this is Alpha Actual. We have a situation. Garrett picked up the handset. Alpha, this is operations. Send traffic. Sir, we need to report a tactical engagement. Our position was compromised. We were neutralized. Strand moved closer to the radio, took the handset from Garrett. Alpha, this is Strand. Define neutralized. Silence. Then the voice came back quieter. Sir, someone took us down, all 4 of us. We were setting up an ambush position at the creek crossing, standard overwatch, thermal imaging, motion sensors, the whole package, and someone got through it all, disabled our sensors, cut our tripwires, hit us with tranquilizer darts from the medical kit. Candidates do not have access to tranquilizer darts. I know, sir, but someone used them. And whoever it was, we never saw them, never heard them. They were there and gone like smoke. Strand looked at Garrett. Garrett looked at the map, at the location of Alpha Team, at the missing blue dot that should have been Master Sergeant Joanna Merrick. Alpha, Strand said slowly, did you see who engaged you? Negative, sir, but we found something, a message, written in the snow near our position. What did it say? Loud equals dead, move fast. The operations center went silent. The only sound was the hum of computer fans and the distant rumble of a generator outside. Garrett stared at the map, at the blue dots still moving, at the gray dots that had failed, at the empty space where one person should be visible but was not. Strand set the handset down, walked to the window, looked out at mountains that held secrets and a woman who had become a ghost in his machine. Sir, Garrett said carefully, what do you want to do? Strand did not answer immediately. He was thinking about the 11 candidates who had failed at Kandahar, about the after-action report that had landed on his desk 3 months ago, about the quiet questions SOCOM had started asking about training methodologies and stress inoculation, and whether the program was actually preparing soldiers for the chaos of real combat. He was thinking about his reputation, his program, his career. And he was thinking about the small, quiet woman who had walked into his office a week ago with a service record that told him nothing and eyes that suggested she had seen things he could only imagine. Escalate to condition red, he said finally. All OPFOR teams, treat Merrick as a high-value target, find her, capture her, use any means necessary within the rules of engagement. Garrett hesitated. Sir, that is going to put a lot of pressure on her. The exercise is already at the limit of safety parameters. She wants to evaluate my program. Fine. Let her evaluate it at full intensity. If she cannot handle the pressure, that tells me everything I need to know about SOCOM's assessment capabilities. And if she can handle it. Strand turned from the window. His face was hard, determined, a man who had made a decision and would see it through regardless of consequences. Then we will deal with that when it happens. Send the order. Garrett picked up the handset, began transmitting to all OPFOR teams, watched blue dots on the map and wondered what they had unleashed into the Montana wilderness. In the field, 15 kilometers from the operations center and 8 kilometers from the extraction point, Sergeant Leon Briggs sat in a medical tent with thermal blankets wrapped around his shoulders and shame wrapped around everything else. His 2 teammates were in sleeping bags, recovering from exposure. One had frostbite on 3 fingers. The other had core temperature that had dropped to 94 degrees. Both would live. Both would be removed from the program. Briggs had no physical injuries, just the wound to his pride that came from watching the best performance of his military career turn into barely controlled failure. A medic brought him hot coffee, real coffee, not the instant powder garbage from MREs, the kind of coffee that meant the exercise was over and he was safe and warm and defeated. He drank it and tasted ashes. The tent flap opened. Captain Garrett stepped inside, snowflakes melting on his shoulders. He looked at Briggs with an expression that was neither sympathetic nor harsh, just professional assessment of a soldier who had learned something painful. How are you feeling, Sergeant? Like shit, sir. Garrett pulled up a folding chair, sat. Your teammates will recover. They will be recycled to the next training class. You passed the survival threshold. You are still in the program. Briggs said nothing. You want to talk about what happened out there? We failed, sir. That is what happened. You made it further than most teams. You evaded contact longer than anyone except two other groups. You demonstrated tactical proficiency and leadership under extreme conditions. Garrett paused. But something is bothering you. I can see it. Briggs looked up, met the captain's eyes. Sir, can I ask you something about Master Sergeant Merrick? You can ask. I may not have answers. Who is she, really? Garrett leaned back in his chair, considered how much to say, how much was appropriate, how much would violate operational security or personal privacy or the unwritten rules about discussing one soldier with another. I do not know, he said finally. Her service record is classified above my clearance level, but I can tell you what I have observed. She has skills that suggest extensive special operations training. She has knowledge of survival techniques that most instructors do not possess. And she has the kind of calm under pressure that only comes from experience in situations where mistakes are measured in body bags. She gave us rabbits, Briggs said quietly. In the middle of the night, in negative 30 degrees. She appeared out of nowhere like she was part of the forest, gave us food and advice and disappeared before we could even process what was happening. Did she say anything else? She said we were too loud, that we would be caught by dawn. Briggs looked down at his coffee. She was right. The dogs found us 20 minutes after she left. We ran, made it 8 kilometers before 2 of my guys went hypothermic. If she had not warned us, if she had not given us that head start, we all would have been captured or worse. Garrett said nothing, just listened. Sometimes that was the most important thing an officer could do. Sir, I underestimated her, Briggs continued. From the moment she stepped off that helicopter, I assumed she was nobody, a paper pusher, someone who had never done the things we do, and I was wrong, completely wrong, and that mistake could have gotten people killed if this was real. But it was not real, and you learned something. I learned I am not as good as I thought I was. Garrett stood, put a hand on Briggs's shoulder. Sergeant, the fact that you can admit that means you are better than most. Get some rest. When you are cleared by medical, you will rejoin the program. And maybe next time you meet someone you do not understand, you will ask questions before making assumptions. He left the tent, walked back through snow that was falling harder now, a storm coming in from the north. Whether that would make the next 12 hours even more brutal for the candidates still in the field. And for one woman who had vanished into that storm like she belonged there. Night fell again, the second night, the killing night, when exhaustion and cold and hunger combined to break soldiers who thought they were unbreakable, when the body started shutting down non-essential systems to preserve core temperature and brain function. When mistakes happened that could not be undone. OPFOR Team Bravo was the best of the hunter teams. 6 soldiers, all with combat deployments, all with advanced training in tracking and tactical operations. Their team leader was a staff sergeant named Rourke who had spent 3 tours in Afghanistan hunting Taliban commanders through mountains not unlike these. He had orders to find Master Sergeant Merrick, capture her, bring her back to prove that even ghosts could be caught. He had thermal drones, night vision, tracking dogs, communications equipment that let him coordinate with other teams. He had every advantage technology and training could provide. And he had absolute confidence in his abilities. They were moving through a heavily timbered valley when the drone operator called contact. Thermal signature, weak, could be human, 1 kilometer north. Rourke checked his GPS, pulled up terrain data. There was a small ice cave in that direction, natural shelter, exactly where someone trying to hide from thermal imaging would go. All elements converge on grid November 7. Surround and breach. She has nowhere to go. The team moved with practiced precision. Silent, professional, they reached the cave entrance. Rourke sent the drone inside. Thermal imaging showed a heat signature, human-shaped, not moving. Breaching, Rourke whispered into his radio. He went in first, night vision turning the cave interior into shades of green. He saw the shape, raised his weapon, moved closer. 3 snowshoe hares, dead, still warm, arranged in the shape of a human body. "It is a decoy," Rourke said. "She is not here, she is." The world exploded. Not literally, but close enough. Snow and ice and fury descended from above. From the cave ceiling where someone had been lying perfectly still for 40 minutes, buried under snow, controlling breathing, lowering body temperature through techniques that should not be possible, waiting with the infinite patience of a predator that knows its prey will come to it. Joanna Merrick dropped into the middle of 6 OPFOR soldiers like a stone into still water. The ripples were chaos. She moved with economy, no wasted motion, every action precise and intentional. Kicked snow into Rourke's night vision goggles. He lost sight, stumbled. She grabbed his rifle, ejected the magazine, let the weapon fall. Soldier 2 spun around, raised his weapon. Joe was already rolling under his line of fire. Sweep kick to his forward leg. He went down hard. She was up, moving, ghost fast. Soldier 3 fired simunition rounds. 5 shots, all missed. Joe had already displaced. She used the cave wall, pushed off, changed direction mid-motion like water finding a new path. Tranquilizer dart, from a medical kit she had acquired from somewhere. It hit Soldier 3 in the neck. He went down. Soldiers 4 and 5 tried to coordinate, flanking movement. Good tactics, but Joe had already anticipated it. She threw something, a flash bang, not standard issue for this exercise. Where had she gotten it? The sound and light filled the cave, disoriented everyone. In the chaos, she moved like smoke, between them, around them, taking weapons, removing magazines, disabling soldiers without causing permanent injury but rendering them completely ineffective. Soldier 6 was the last. He saw her finally, really saw her, standing 2 meters away in the darkness, perfectly still. No sound, no heavy breathing, just presence. "You are dead," Joe said, quiet certain, "all of you." She dropped 6 magazines at her feet, turned, walked into the blizzard that had started while they were inside the cave. Gone. Rourke sat in the snow, weapon useless without ammunition, night vision useless with snow blocking the optics, pride shattered into pieces sharp enough to draw blood. He keyed his radio. "Command, this is Bravo, we have been neutralized." Strand's voice came back, cold, disbelieving. "Say again, Bravo." "Sir, we engaged the target. She took us down, all of us. We never had a chance." "Did you identify the target?" "Affirmative, sir. Master Sergeant Merrick, she was. Sir, she is not normal, she is something else." In the operations center, Strand threw his coffee mug against the wall. It shattered. Coffee ran down white paint like blood. Garrett watched without expression, waiting. "Get me SOCOM on secure line," Strand said finally. "I need to know what we are actually dealing with." "Sir, it is 0300 on a Saturday. SOCOM duty officer is not going to have access to classified personnel files." "Then get me someone who does. I need to know who Joanna Merrick is. I need to know right now." Garrett made the call, waded through transfers and security protocols and increasingly senior voices asking why a training facility commander was calling in the middle of the night, demanding classified information. Finally, a voice came on the line, female, tired but alert. the voice of someone used to calls at odd hours about situations that could not wait. "This is Colonel Sarah Madsen, SERE Program Director. You are looking for information on Master Sergeant Merrick." Strand took the phone. "Colonel, this is Lieutenant Colonel Strand at Fort Redstone Mountain Warfare Training Center." "Yes, ma'am. I need to know exactly who I have on my training range and what her actual mission parameters are." "Her mission parameters are classified, Colonel, but I can tell you what you need to know. Master Sergeant Merrick is the most qualified survival instructor in the United States military. She has forgotten more about evasion and resistance than most of your OPFOR teams will ever learn. She is there because 11 of your program graduates failed catastrophically in combat 3 months ago, and we need to know why." "They failed because combat is unpredictable, ma'am, because the enemy does not follow our training scenarios. They failed because they encountered a female local asset with critical intelligence and dismissed her as unreliable. They failed because their training did not prepare them to trust information from sources that do not fit their expectations. They failed because arrogance and prejudice made them stupid, and 12 soldiers died because of it." Strand felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Ma'am, I was not aware of the specific circumstances." "Of course you were not, because the after-action report was classified. But I will tell you this, Colonel. Master Sergeant Merrick lost 11 teammates to that same kind of thinking 8 years ago. She has spent every day since then making sure it does not happen again. So when she walks into your facility looking like someone who does not belong, when she lets your people dismiss her and underestimate her and treat her like she is not worth their time, she is testing whether they have the capacity to look beyond surface assumptions and recognize capability when it does not come in the package they expect. And if they fail that test, then we redesign your program from the ground up, because we cannot afford to graduate soldiers who will make the same mistakes that got good people killed." Colonel Madsen hung up. Strand stood holding a dead phone. Garrett watched him, waiting to see what would happen next. "Sir," Garrett said carefully. Strand set the phone down, looked at the map, at the dots scattered across wilderness, at the empty space where Joanna Merrick should be but was not. "Recall all OPFOR teams. Stand down to observation only. No more aggressive pursuit." "Sir, the exercise still has 18 hours to run." "I know, but I am not going to have one of my people injured or worse because I was too stubborn to recognize what is actually happening here." Strand turned to face Garrett. "She is not trying to pass our test, Captain. We are trying to pass hers, and so far we are failing." But the recall order came too late. In a ravine 12 kilometers from the operations center, one of the OPFOR soldiers stepped wrong. Ice hidden under fresh snow, his foot broke through, ankle twisted. The sound was distinct, crack, then silence, then screaming. His team called for medical evacuation. Standard procedure. Safety was paramount. The exercise was realistic but not worth permanent injury. But the helicopter could not fly in the blizzard. Wind was too strong, visibility too poor. The injured soldier would have to wait until conditions improved. 4 hours minimum. His team leader made a decision. They would move him to a more accessible location, carry him if necessary, get him somewhere the helicopter could reach when the weather cleared. They started moving, slow, careful. The injured soldier was in bad shape, compound fracture, bone visible through torn skin, shock setting in, body temperature dropping fast. They made it 2 kilometers before they saw the figure standing in their path. Master Sergeant Joanna Merrick. No pack, no visible weapon, just standing in falling snow like a statue carved from ice. The team leader raised his rifle. "Ma'am, we have a real casualty. We are moving to evac point. Do not interfere." Joe looked at the injured soldier, looked at the improvised stretcher, looked at the direction they were heading. She knew this terrain, knew there was a closer location, a better location, sheltered, accessible. But to get there, they would have to trust her. "You are going the wrong way," she said. "Ma'am, with respect, we have our orders." "Your orders will get him killed. Core temperature is dropping too fast. He will be in cardiac arrest before you reach your destination. There is a better way." The team leader hesitated, looking at this small woman who had systematically dismantled his colleagues, looking at his injured teammate who was fading, looking at the map that said his route was correct. Making a choice. "Show us," he said. Joe turned, started walking. They followed. She led them through terrain that looked impossible, down a slope, through a narrow gap in rocks, to a small clearing protected by overhanging cliffs. Wind could not reach here. Snow fell but did not accumulate. It was almost warm by comparison. "Set him down," Joe said. "Start a fire, small, controlled. He needs heat." While they worked, she examined the injury. The bone, the swelling, the color of the skin. "Do you have morphine in your medical kit?" "Yes, ma'am." "Give him 0.5 milligrams, no more. We need him conscious but pain managed." She looked at the team leader. "Radio for medevac to these coordinates. Tell them we have shelter. Tell them we will mark the landing zone with IR strobes when they are inbound." He did as she instructed. Then he watched as she stabilized the fracture with materials from the environment. Straight branches, paracord, efficiency that suggested thousands of hours of practice. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you are supposed to be evading us. Why are you helping?" Joe did not look up from her work. Because the exercise does not matter, his life does. "But you will be captured, you will fail." "I will accept the consequences." 20 minutes later, she had the soldier stabilized, warm, pain managed. The team formed a perimeter, waiting for the helicopter that would come when the weather cleared enough. Joe stood, prepared to leave. "Ma'am," the team leader said, "you are not going to run." "No point, you know where I am. Your teams will converge on this location. I will be captured." "So you are just giving up?" Joe looked at him with those winter sky eyes. "I am choosing what matters. There is a difference." She sat down, waited. The team surrounded her, not aggressively, more like guards protecting something valuable than captors holding a prisoner. 15 minutes later, 3 more OPFOR teams arrived, 12 soldiers total. They found Master Sergeant Merrick sitting calmly beside an injured teammate, hands visible, no weapons, no resistance. The senior NCO approached. "Master Sergeant Merrick, you are captured. The exercise is over for you." "Understood, Sergeant." "You need to come with us back to base. After the helicopter arrives, I want to ensure he is evacuated safely." The NCO looked at the injured soldier, at Joe, at his team, agreed. They waited together, OPFOR and the woman they had been hunting. No hostility now, just professional soldiers doing their job and one woman who had chosen humanity over victory. The helicopter arrived with dawn. Medics loaded the injured soldier. He was stable, would recover, would walk again, would have a scar and a story about the time a female master sergeant saved his life during a training exercise. Joe stood, let the OPFOR team escort her to a waiting vehicle. Hands were zip-tied in front, standard procedure. She did not resist. They drove back to base in a convoy of 3 vehicles. Joe sat in the middle vehicle, 4 soldiers surrounding her, silent, watching. One of them, a young corporal, finally spoke. "Ma'am, how did you do it?" "Do what?" "All of it, the trackers, the teams, surviving out there like the cold did not matter." Joe did not answer, just looked out the window at mountains turning gold in sunrise. "Were you really going to complete the exercise? Were you heading for the extraction point?" "I was, until something more important happened." "Is that how you think in combat? Mission first unless lives are at stake." "That is how everyone should think, but not everyone does." They arrived at the base, were met by Captain Garrett and Lieutenant Colonel Strand. The OPFOR team leader reported, "Sir, Master Sergeant Merrick is captured. She surrendered willingly after providing emergency medical care to Specialist Martinez." Strand looked at Joe, really looked at her, seeing something different than what he had seen a week ago. "Cut her loose, she is not a prisoner." One of the soldiers removed the zip ties. Joe rubbed her wrists, stood at attention, waiting. "Master Sergeant," Strand said, "I need to debrief you privately now." They walked to his office. Garrett followed. The door closed. The three of them stood in a room that suddenly felt very small. "I spoke with Colonel Madsen," Strand said. "She explained the situation, the real situation, why you are here." Joe said nothing. "So let me ask you directly, are you here to shut down my program?" "I am here to evaluate whether your program produces soldiers who can adapt to variables that do not fit their training scenarios, whether they can recognize capability in unexpected packages, whether they can make decisions based on reality instead of assumptions." "And your assessment?" "Mixed. Your candidates have excellent technical skills, but they lack humility. They lack the ability to question their own certainty. Sergeant Briggs is a perfect example, tactically sound, physically capable, but so confident in his own judgment that he almost got his team killed because he could not imagine there was a better way than the one he had chosen." Strand absorbed that. "And the OPFOR team that chose to trust you, the ones who followed your lead to save their teammate. They passed. They demonstrated the capacity to put mission aside when human life was at stake. They trusted a source they had been hunting as an enemy because the situation demanded it." "So some passed and some failed." "Yes, sir." Strand walked to his window, looked out at the training facility he had built, his legacy, his contribution to making soldiers harder and better and more capable of surviving the worst the world could throw at them. "What happens now?" he asked. "I write my report. I submit it to SOCOM. They make decisions above both our pay grades. And if your report says my program needs to change, then it changes, or it closes, depending on how serious the deficiencies are." Strand turned to face her. "Master Sergeant, can I ask you something personal?" "Yes, sir." "The 11 teammates you lost, the ones Colonel Madsen mentioned, what happened to them?" Joe was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than before, carrying weight that words could barely support. "We had intelligence from a local woman, Afghan, mid-30s. She told us there was an ambush waiting on our route, told us exactly where, exactly when, had information that could have saved lives, but our team leader dismissed her, said she was unreliable, said local females could not be trusted with tactical information, said we would stick to the original plan. And we walked into the ambush. 11 killed. I survived because I was rear security, far enough back that when the firing started I could escape, but I heard them die, on the radio, calling for help that never came fast enough." The room was silent except for the hum of heating vents and the distant sound of soldiers training outside, living, learning, preparing for battles they hoped they would never fight. "I am sorry," Strand said, "for your loss, and for my part in creating an environment where similar mistakes could happen." Joe nodded. "Sir, your program has good bones. The technical training is excellent. The physical preparation is world-class. You just need to add one more element." "Which is?" "Humility. The understanding that capability comes in packages we do not expect. That the person we dismiss might be the person who saves our life. That being wrong is not weakness if we can admit it and adapt." Garrett, who had been silent through the entire exchange, finally spoke. "How do we teach that, ma'am?" Joe looked at him, almost smiled. "You cannot teach it, Captain. You can only create situations where soldiers either learn it or fail. That is what I did this week. Created a situation. Let people make choices. Observed the results." "And if we want to incorporate that into regular training?" Strand asked. "Then you bring in instructors who do not fit the mold. Female instructors, older instructors, instructors from different backgrounds and experiences. You create scenarios where the obvious answer is wrong and the dismissed source is right. You force candidates to confront their own biases before those biases get people killed in combat." Strand thought about that, about what it would mean for his program, about the resistance he would face from traditionalists who believed there was only one way to make warriors. "Will you help us?" he asked. "Stay on as a consultant, help redesign the training?" Joe shook her head. "I cannot, sir. I have other facilities to evaluate, other programs that need the same assessment, but I can recommend instructors, people who understand what you are trying to accomplish." "Then do that, and Master Sergeant." "Yes, sir. Thank you for showing me what I was missing." Joe came to attention, saluted. Strand returned it. She turned to leave. "Ma'am," Garrett said, stopping her. "One more question. The OPFOR teams, the ones who captured you, when they brought you in, they searched you, found all your gear accounted for. But when they checked their own equipment later, they realized something. All of them, every single soldier in that convoy. Their rifle magazines were missing. Every single one." Joe looked at him, expressionless. "How did you do that? You were zip-tied, surrounded, under observation the entire time." For the first time since arriving at Fort Redstone, Joanna Merrick smiled. Really smiled. Not the cold ghost smile she had given Briggs in the forest, but something warmer, almost playful. The smile of someone who knew secrets and was not going to share them. "Captain Garrett, if I told you, it would not be impressive anymore." She walked out. Left them standing in the office with more questions than answers. Left them with the understanding that they had been tested by someone operating at a level they had not known existed. And left them with 12 rifle magazines that had vanished from secured equipment pouches, while the soldiers carrying them had been absolutely certain nothing was wrong. 2 days later, Master Sergeant Joanna Merrick stood in the operations center one final time. Her pack was ready, her orders cut. A helicopter waited outside to take her to her next assignment. Another facility, another program, another group of soldiers who would underestimate her until she taught them the cost of assumption. Garrett walked in, handed her a folder. "Your official evaluation results from the exercise, for your records." Joe opened it. "Read." Her expression did not change. "This says I failed, captured before reaching the extraction point." "That is what the official record shows." "Yes, ma'am." But every instructor who worked with you this week has submitted written statements saying you demonstrated the highest level of tactical proficiency, survival capability, and operational judgment they have ever witnessed. Those statements are also in your file, along with a recommendation from Colonel Strand that you be promoted to Sergeant Major and assigned to the Special Operations Schoolhouse as a senior instructor. Joe closed the folder. I will not be accepting that assignment. I know, Colonel Madsen told us, you prefer the field work, the evaluation missions, the chance to identify problems before they become casualties. Yes. Garrett held out his hand. It has been an honor, Master Sergeant. You taught us more in 1 week than most people learn in a career. She shook his hand. The honor was mine, Captain. You have good soldiers here. They just needed to understand that good is not the same as perfect. She picked up her pack, walked toward the door, stopped, turned back. Captain, one more thing. Sergeant Briggs, the young ranger who dismissed me that first day. Yes, ma'am. He has potential, real potential, but he needs to fail more. Needs to learn that confidence without humility is just arrogance waiting to get people killed. Give him the hardest assignments. Push him until he breaks. Then help him build himself back into someone who can lead under pressure without letting ego cloud judgment. I will, ma'am. Good, because in 5 years, that kid is going to be leading teams in places where mistakes do not get do-overs. I want him to be ready. Joe walked out into cold Montana air. The helicopter was running, blades turning. She climbed aboard, strapped in, looked back at Fort Redstone one last time. Saw Briggs standing outside the barracks, watching her leave. He raised his hand, not quite a salute, not quite a wave, just acknowledgement, recognition. Respect earned the hard way. She nodded back. The helicopter lifted, banked south. Within minutes, Fort Redstone was gone. Just another memory in a career full of places where she had walked in as a ghost and left as a lesson. She closed her eyes, let the vibration of the helicopter lull her toward something like rest, thought about the next facility, the next group of soldiers, the next test. Wondered if they would see her coming. Doubted it. They never did. Behind her, in the operations center at Fort Redstone, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Strand sat at his desk writing a report that would change how the Army thought about training, about assumptions, about the danger of certainty. He wrote about a woman who had vanished into wilderness and reappeared as something else, about soldiers who had learned hard lessons, about the difference between being skilled and being wise. And he wrote about magazines that had been stolen from secured pouches by a woman with her hands tied, surrounded by watchers, under observation every second. Magazines that had simply vanished like they had never existed. He would never know how she did it. None of them would. That was the point. Some lessons are taught with words, some with demonstrations, and some with mysteries that remind you there are levels of capability beyond what you can imagine. Master Sergeant Joanna Merrick had taught all three. The question now was whether anyone had really been paying attention. The briefing hall at Fort Redstone had never been so quiet. 42 candidates sat in rows of folding chairs, their faces showing the wear of 8 days that had felt like 8 years. 8 days of cold that had tested their bodies. 8 days of exhaustion that had tested their minds. 8 days of being pushed to the edge of what they thought possible, and then being asked to go further. And now they sat in a heated room, warm for the first time in over a week, waiting to learn whether they had passed or failed, whether the suffering had meaning or whether they would be sent back to their units with nothing but scars and stories. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Strand stood at the front of the room. Behind him, a projection screen showed statistics, completion rates, performance metrics, cold numbers that represented hot blood and frozen sweat and decisions made in moments when the brain was screaming to quit. Captain Ellis Garrett stood to the side, watching, waiting. And in the back corner, barely visible in the shadows, sat Master Sergeant Joanna Merrick, still wearing her field uniform, still covered in the dust of Montana wilderness, still looking like someone who did not belong here. Except now, everyone in the room knew she belonged more than any of them. Strand began. 8 days ago, you started the final phase of this training program. 42 of you began. 34 of you are sitting here now. 8 were removed for medical reasons. None quit. That is the first thing I want you to understand. None of you quit. That matters. He paused, let it sink in, saw shoulders straighten slightly, saw pride creeping back into faces that had worn only exhaustion. The second thing I want you to understand is that this exercise was not what you thought it was. Yes, you were tested on survival skills, navigation, evasion, resistance to interrogation, all the technical competencies we promised to evaluate, but there was another test happening, one you did not know about, one that most of you failed. Confusion rippled through the room. Sergeant Leon Briggs leaned forward in his seat, brow furrowed. 3 months ago, Strand continued, 11 graduates of this program were killed in combat. Good soldiers, well-trained, physically capable, tactically sound. They died because they made a critical error in judgment. They dismissed intelligence from a source they did not trust, a local woman, Afghan, someone who did not fit their expectations of what a reliable source looked like. They ignored her warnings and walked into an ambush that killed 12 American soldiers and 3 Afghan allies. The room was absolutely silent now. SOCOM wanted to know if this program was producing soldiers who would make the same mistake, soldiers who would let assumptions and prejudice override good judgment, soldiers who would dismiss capability because it came in an unexpected package. Strand gestured toward the back of the room. So they sent us Master Sergeant Joanna Merrick, and we failed her test. Heads turned, everyone looking at Jo. She sat perfectly still, expressionless, a statue carved from stone in silence. Master Sergeant Merrick is not a liaison officer, Strand said. She is not an administrator. She is not a headquarters bureaucrat. She is one of the most qualified survival instructors in the United States military. 12 years teaching SERE. 4 combat deployments embedded with Delta Force and DEVGRU. Holder of the only perfect score ever recorded in the Level C Resistance Laboratory. The woman who earned the callsign Wraith by evading a 40-man hunter force for 7 days in the North Carolina wilderness with 0 resupply. You could have heard a pin drop. Briggs stared at Jo with eyes wide. Other candidates looked at each other, processing, recalculating everything they had assumed. She came here looking like someone you could dismiss, acting like someone you could ignore. And you did, most of you. You saw a small woman in a clean uniform with no combat patch and decided she was nobody. You made assumptions based on appearance, on gender, on your own certainty that you knew what competence looked like. Strand's voice hardened. And if this had been combat, those assumptions would have gotten people killed. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, heavy, the weight of recognition settling on shoulders that thought they had already carried enough. But some of you learned, Strand continued. Some of you started asking questions instead of making assumptions. Captain Garrett, Specialist Chen from Team 11, the OPFOR team that chose to follow Master Sergeant Merrick's advice when one of their own was injured. Those soldiers demonstrated the capacity to recognize capability regardless of where it came from. They passed the test the rest of you did not even know you were taking. Briggs slowly stood. Sir, permission to speak. Granted, Sergeant. Sir, I failed that test completely. From the moment Master Sergeant Merrick arrived, I dismissed her. I made assumptions. I let my ego convince me that I knew better than someone I had never bothered to understand. He turned to look at Jo. Ma'am, I owe you an apology, a real one, Not because you proved you could survive better than me, but because I treated you with disrespect before I even knew who you were. That was wrong, and I am sorry." Joe stood, walked down the aisle between chairs, stopped in front of Briggs, looked up at him. He was 8 inches taller, 70 pounds heavier, younger, faster, stronger in every measurable way. She offered her hand. He shook it, felt the calluses, the strength that did not come from a gym, the kind of grip that belonged to someone who had hung from ropes and climbed mountains and done pull-ups until their hands bled because that was what survival required. "Apology accepted, Sergeant Briggs," Joe said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "But understand something. I did not come here to make you feel bad. I came here to make you better. Because 3 months from now, or 6 months from now, or 2 years from now, you are going to be in a place where people are trying to kill you. And in that place, the person who saves your life might not look like what you expect, might not sound like what you expect, might not fit any profile you have been trained to recognize. And if you dismiss that person because of assumptions, you will die. And worse, the people trusting you will die." She released his hand, looked around the room at faces that were finally, truly listening. "Skills do not have gender," she said. "Leadership does not have a size requirement. Courage does not come in one color or one shape or one voice. If you want to survive, you need to learn to see what is actually there instead of what you expect to be there. That is the lesson. That is why I was here. That is what you need to carry with you into every mission for the rest of your career." Strand stepped forward. "Master Sergeant Merrick has agreed to conduct one final demonstration before she leaves, a practical exercise, to show you exactly what capability looks like when you stop making assumptions about who has it." Joe turned to face him. "Sir, I did not agree to." "I know you did not, Master Sergeant. I am asking now. These soldiers need to see. They need to understand. Will you help them?" Joe looked at Strand, saw something in his eyes that had not been there a week ago. Humility, recognition, the kind of change that only happened when a person confronted their own limitations and chose to grow instead of defend. "What did you have in mind, sir?" "The shoot house. You against our top 10 students. Close quarters combat scenario. Simunition. If you win, it proves capability is about skill and training, not demographics. If they win, they earn bragging rights over someone they now know is legitimate." "Sir, that is not a fair test. I have been doing CQB for 12 years. These are students." "Which is exactly why they need to see it. They need to understand the difference between being competent and being expert, between being confident and being truly dangerous." Strand paused. "Unless you are concerned, you cannot win." Joe almost smiled, almost. "Sir, I am concerned your students will be embarrassed." "Then embarrass them. Teach them. Show them what excellence looks like so they have a standard to chase for the rest of their careers." Joe looked around the room, at faces young and old, eager and exhausted, proud and humbled. Soldiers who had come here to prove themselves and were now learning that proving yourself was a lifetime commitment, not a single test. 30 minutes, she said. "Let me change into training gear and check the facility." "Done, dismissed. Top 10 students by overall score report to the shoot house in 30 minutes. Everyone else you will observe from the control room." The briefing hall erupted into motion, candidates moving, talking, processing. Briggs stayed seated for a moment longer, staring at nothing, thinking about assumptions and arrogance and how close he had come to carrying both into combat where they would have killed him. Then he stood, walked outside into cold air that felt clean, walked to the shoot house that would host a demonstration he suspected would change how he understood combat for the rest of his life. The shoot house was a maze of rooms and corridors designed to simulate urban combat, walls that could be reconfigured, doors that opened into fatal funnels, windows that offered entry points or death traps depending on how they were used. It smelled like gun oil and sweat, and the rubber polymer of simunition rounds. 10 students stood in the main room, the best of the best, Briggs among them, each one wearing protective gear, face masks, groin protection, heavy gloves. Simunition rounds hurt, left bruises, could crack ribs if they hit right. This was not theoretical combat. This was as close to real as training allowed. Garrett briefed them. Scenario is hostage rescue. 3 hostages inside, unknown number of hostiles. Your mission is to clear the structure, neutralize threats, extract hostages. You will work as a team, coordinated entry, sector discipline, everything you have been taught. Master Sergeant Merrick will play the opposing force. Alone. She has the same ammunition load as each of you. 30 rounds, no resupply, no support, just her. Sir, one of the students said, 10 against 1 seems unfair. It does, Garrett agreed. For you, Merrick is not subject to the same movement restrictions you are. She knows this facility better than you do, and she has forgotten more about CQB than most operators will ever learn. Your advantage is numbers and teamwork. Her advantage is experience and the fact that she does not have to coordinate with anyone. Questions? None. You have 5 minutes to develop your plan. Then you execute. Observers will watch from the control room, cameras throughout the facility. This will be recorded for training purposes. Make it count. He left, the 10 students huddled, Briggs took charge. Standard entry, Alpha team takes main door, Bravo team takes side entrance. We move on 3 count. Sector discipline, call your shots, watch for crossfire, she is alone. We are 10, we move fast and we win. They nodded, checked weapons, chambered rounds, moved to their positions. In the control room, Strand and Garrett watched monitors showing different angles of the shoot house interior. 30 other candidates crowded behind them, watching, waiting. Where is Merrick? Strand asked. Garrett checked the cameras. I do not see her. She went in through the back entrance 5 minutes ago, but now, nothing. She is already in position. She knows we are watching. She is staying out of camera view until it starts. Sir, are we really doing this? 10 trained soldiers against 1 instructor. Yes, because they need to see it. They need to understand what elite actually means. They need a standard that scares them into continued improvement. On the main monitor, Briggs gave the signal, 3, 2, 1. Both teams breached simultaneously, doors kicked open, soldiers flowing through with weapons up and discipline sharp, moving like they had been taught, pie slicing corners, clearing rooms, calling clear. First room, empty. Second room, empty. Third room, 2 mannequin hostages. 1 student moved to secure them. And then the lights went out. Complete darkness, the kind of black that makes you forget which way is up. Emergency lighting should have kicked on immediately. It did not. Someone had disabled it. Night vision, Briggs hissed, but they did not have night vision. This was supposed to be a daylight scenario. Then gunfire, simunition rounds from somewhere above. 3 students lit up with paint marker, hit, down, out of the fight. Contact up, 2nd floor. They returned fire, toward the sound. 30 rounds between 7 remaining students lighting up the darkness. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Return fire stopped. They reloaded, moved toward the stairs, careful, professional. Reached the 2nd floor. Empty. Where the hell is she? Then movement. A shadow detaching from shadows. 1 student turned, too slow. Simunition round caught him center mass. He went down. 6 left. They formed a defensive circle, backs to each other, weapons out, scanning. "She is in the walls," someone said. "Has to be. There is nowhere else." Briggs looked up, saw ventilation grates, standard size, too small for a person, should be too small. Movement in his peripheral vision. He spun, fired, hit nothing. Then pain exploded across his shoulder blade, round from behind. He spun again, nothing there. "How is she?" A flash bang went off, not from inventory. Where had she gotten flash bangs? Sound and light filled the space. 5 soldiers disoriented, firing blind, hitting each other in the chaos. When vision cleared, only Briggs remained standing, and he was out of ammunition. Had fired all 30 rounds at shadows and missed every shot. He stood in the center of the room, weapon empty, pride shattered. A voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "You did everything right, tactically, technically, but you forgot one thing." Briggs turned slowly, still could not see her. "What?" he called out. "The person you are fighting does not care about your expectations, does not follow your assumptions about what is possible. If you only prepare for enemies who fight the way you train to fight them, you will die when you meet someone who does not." Then she appeared, stepped out of a space that should not have existed, a maintenance crawlspace behind a false wall, weapon lowered, face calm. She had been inside the structure the entire time, moving through infrastructure they did not know existed, seeing them on cameras they did not know were there, hitting them from angles they had never considered. "The scenario was hostage rescue," Joe said. "You never even checked on the hostages after the lights went out. You got distracted by contact and forgot your mission. In a real situation, that gets hostages killed." Briggs looked around at his team. All down, all marked with paint, all thoroughly beaten by one person they outnumbered 10 to 1. "How did you do that?" he asked. "I did a walkthrough before you arrived. Found every weakness in the structure, every hidden space, every alternate route. I prepared. You assumed. Preparation beats assumption every time." She walked past him, out of the shoot house, left him standing in darkness with the taste of defeat sharp and bitter and educational. In the control room, no one spoke. 30 candidates had just watched 10 of their best get systematically dismantled by a woman half their size and twice their age. Watched her move through a structure like water through cracks. Watched her make the impossible look easy. Strand turned to face them. "That is what expert looks like. That is the standard. Some of you will reach it, most of you will not, but now you know it exists. Now you know what is possible when skill meets preparation meets experience. Chase that standard. Spend your career chasing it. And maybe, if you are lucky and you work harder than you ever thought possible, you will get close." He walked out. Garrett followed. The candidates remained, staring at monitors showing empty rooms and defeated soldiers and paint marks that proved a lesson some would remember forever. Briggs emerged from the shoot house 20 minutes later, removed his protective gear, stood in the cold feeling like he had been run over by something he never saw coming. Joe was waiting outside, still in her training gear, calm, unaffected. "You did well," she said. "I got destroyed. You followed your training, you communicated, you maintained discipline under pressure. Those are not small things. But I lost. You lost to someone with 12 years more experience than you. That is not failure, that is education." She paused. "Sergeant Briggs, can I tell you something?" "Yes, ma'am." 5 years ago, I did the same scenario against 10 instructors at Fort Bragg. Lost, badly, got hit in the first 30 seconds, was so embarrassed I almost quit. But my mentor told me something I want to tell you. She said defeat is only permanent if you refuse to learn from it. Use this. Study what happened, figure out what you missed, train harder, come back better. That is how you become dangerous. Who was your mentor? Colonel Sarah Madsen. She runs the SERE program now. But back then, she was a captain who had more combat deployments than anyone I ever met. She taught me that being small and female was not a disadvantage. It was an advantage if I was smart enough to use it. Taught me that assumptions are weapons you can turn against people who make them. Briggs absorbed that. Ma'am, what you said in there about preparation beating assumption, is that really the lesson, preparation? Jo shook her head. No, that was secondary. The real lesson is humility, understanding that there is always someone better, always someone who knows things you do not, always someone who can teach you if you are willing to learn instead of defend your ego. The soldiers who died at Kandahar were not bad at their jobs. They were just so certain they were right that they could not imagine being wrong. That certainty killed them. And the local woman who tried to warn them, what happened to her? She survived, watched American soldiers die because they would not listen, watched Afghan allies die because the Americans ignored intelligence that could have saved them. She works with CIA now, helps identify assets who are dismissed or overlooked, makes sure their intelligence gets heard by people who will listen. Have you met her? Not yet, but I will, soon. That is part of why I do this work. To honor the people who had something important to say and were not heard because they did not look like what others expected. Briggs stood quiet for a moment, processing, learning, becoming someone different than who he had been an hour ago. Thank you, ma'am, for the lesson, for everything. Thank you for being willing to learn, Sergeant. That is rarer than you think. She walked away, toward the billeting area, toward a hot shower and clean clothes and the next assignment waiting in encrypted email, toward another facility full of soldiers who would underestimate her, toward another test she would administer with silence and skill and the kind of patience that only came from carrying the dead. 3 months later, Fort Redstone looked different, or maybe it was the same and Joanna Merrick was seeing it differently now. She stood outside the main headquarters building, watching candidates move through obstacle courses and training ranges, watching instructors put them through hell, watching the machinery of military transformation grind raw civilians into warriors. But something had changed. 2 of the instructors were women. One was in her 50s, older than most officers. Another was barely 5 feet tall. Both were SERE qualified. Both were combat veterans. Both would be underestimated by students who had not yet learned the cost of assumption. Captain Garrett approached. He wore a major's oak leaves now, promoted, rewarded for adaptability and the wisdom to recognize his own blind spots. Major Garrett, Jo said, congratulations on the promotion. Thank you, ma'am. I heard you were coming back. Did not believe it until I saw you standing here. Colonel Strand asked me to consult on the revised training program. Apparently, SOCOM was impressed enough with my report to fund significant changes. Changes is an understatement. We have doubled our instructor diversity, added scenario training that specifically tests for bias and assumption, created evaluation metrics that measure adaptability alongside technical skill. The program is unrecognizable from what it was 3 months ago. Good, that was the point. Garrett studied her face. Can I ask you something personal, ma'am? You can ask. Why do you do this? The evaluation work, the testing. You could be teaching at the schoolhouse, leading programs. You have the credibility and the rank, but instead you go from facility to facility letting people underestimate you, letting them disrespect you. Why? Jo looked out at the mountains, at snow that never fully melted even in summer, at terrain that had tested her and dozens of others and would keep testing people for as long as the army needed warriors who could fight in places that wanted them dead. Because 11 people I cared about died because someone made assumptions, she said. Because 12 soldiers at Kandahar died for the same reason. Because every year, good people die in combat not because they lacked courage or skill, but because they lacked the humility to recognize capability in unexpected places. I do this work so maybe, eventually, we stop making that mistake. So maybe the next local woman with intelligence that could save lives is listened to instead of dismissed. So maybe the next small, quiet person who does not look dangerous is evaluated based on what they can do instead of how they look. That is a heavy burden to carry, ma'am. Yes, but someone has to carry it. Might as well be me. Garrett nodded. Sergeant Briggs is here. He is assisting with the new training program, teaching humility and adaptability to the next class. He credits you with saving his career. Says if he had gone to combat with the attitude he had 3 months ago, he would have gotten people killed. He learned that is all that matters. He wants to see you, thank you properly. Jo shook her head. No need. I am only here for a few hours. Need to review the new protocols and provide feedback to Colonel Strand. Then I have another facility to visit. Where? Fort Benning. Another training program with problems. Another group of soldiers who need to learn that assumptions are expensive and humility is cheap by comparison. They do not know what is about to hit them. Jo almost smiled. They never do, that is what makes it effective. She started walking toward the headquarters building, stopped, turned back. Major Garrett, one more thing, keep pushing Briggs, he has real potential, but he needs to fail more before he leads in combat. Needs to learn that confidence without doubt is just arrogance waiting to kill people. Make him uncomfortable, make him question himself, make him better. I will, ma'am. Jo entered the building, walked through corridors she had walked 3 months ago when everyone thought she was nobody. Now they knew different. Soldiers she passed stood straighter, nodded respect. Word had spread. The ghost had returned. She found Strand in his office. He stood when she entered, professional courtesy, respect earned hard. Master Sergeant Merrick, thank you for coming. Sir. I wanted to show you what we have done, the changes, get your feedback before we roll it out to the next training cycle. He gestured to a thick binder on his desk. New curriculum, new evaluation metrics, new instructor standards, all based on your recommendations. Jo picked up the binder, flipped through pages, saw her words transformed into policy, her experience codified into doctrine. Her 11 dead teammates honored through changes that might prevent future deaths. This is good work, sir. It is your work, Master Sergeant. I just implemented it. You did more than implement. You had the courage to admit your program needed changing, to admit you had blind spots. That takes more strength than most officers have. Strand sat down. Looked older than he had 3 months ago, or maybe just wiser, more aware of what he did not know. I got a letter last week from the mother of one of the soldiers killed at Kandahar. She heard about the program changes, wanted to thank whoever was responsible for making sure her son's death led to something better. I told her it was you, gave her your name, hoped that was okay. It was, sir. She wants to meet you, when you have time. Says she wants to thank you personally. I will make time. They sat in silence for a moment. 2 soldiers who had tested each other and found mutual respect on the other side of conflict. Master Sergeant, Strand said finally, I want to apologize for how I treated you when you arrived, for the assumptions I made, for putting you in situations designed to make you fail instead of recognizing you were here to make us better. No apology necessary, sir. You responded exactly as expected. That was the point. The test was never whether you would recognize me immediately. It was whether you would recognize me eventually, whether you would learn. You did. That is what matters. Still, I was wrong, and I want you to know I understand that now. Joe stood. Sir, being wrong is not weakness. Staying wrong is. You changed. Your program changed. Soldiers will live because of it. That is what leadership looks like. Own the mistake. Fix the system. Move forward. She walked to the door, stopped. One more thing, always one more thing. Sir, the woman from Kandahar, the local asset who tried to warn the patrol. Her name is Aziza Samami. She works with CIA now, probably the best human intelligence source we have in South Asia. She is going to be at Langley next month for a recognition ceremony. I am going to meet her. Thank her for trying to save American lives even though we did not listen. Would you like to come with me? Strand stood. Yes, ma'am, I would be honored. Joe nodded, left, walked back out into Colorado air that smelled like pine and snow, and the kind of cold that reminded you that comfort was temporary and survival was the only thing that mattered. She pulled out her phone, encrypted, secure, 3 new messages waiting. First message, from Colonel Madsen. Fort Benning confirmed. They are expecting you next week. Do not go easy on them. They need what you do. Second message, from Major Garrett. Briggs asked me to pass along his thanks. Says you changed his life. Wants to know if there is any way he can repay you. I told him the best repayment is becoming the leader you saw potential in. He understood. Third message, unknown number. Master Sergeant Merrick, this is Aziza Samami. Colonel Madsen gave me your contact information. I heard about the work you are doing, teaching soldiers to listen, to see beyond assumptions. I want to help, please call me. Joe stared at the third message for a long time, thought about circles closing, about debts being paid across years and continents, about women who had tried to save lives and were dismissed and now were finally being heard. She typed a response. Ms. Samami, I would be honored to work with you. Let us teach them together. She sent the message, climbed into the rental car that would take her to the airport, to the next facility, to the next group of soldiers who thought they knew what capability looked like. As she drove away from Fort Redstone, she looked in the rearview mirror, saw mountains, saw training ranges, saw the place where she had been dismissed and underestimated, and then had proven that assumptions were the most dangerous enemy any soldier would ever face. Saw Briggs standing outside the headquarters building, watching her leave, hand raised, not quite a salute, not quite a wave, just acknowledgement, the way one warrior recognizes another. She nodded back. The mirror angle made him disappear. But the lesson remained, in policy, in curriculum, in soldiers who would carry forward the understanding that capability comes in unexpected packages, and dismissing those packages is the difference between life and death. Some lessons are taught with words, some with demonstrations, and some with the patient, persistent work of people who refuse to let the dead die twice, who refuse to let mistakes made in blood be forgotten when policies are written. Joanna Merrick was one of those people, would always be one of those people, until the day she stopped breathing or the day the military learned to see clearly, whichever came first. She suspected the former would happen long before the latter, but that did not mean she would stop trying. The highway stretched ahead, the mountains fell behind, and somewhere in the distance another facility full of soldiers waited, soldiers who did not know her, soldiers who would make assumptions, soldiers who would learn, whether they wanted to or not. Because that was what ghosts did. They appeared when you were not looking. They taught lessons you did not know you needed. They vanished before you understood what they had given you. And if you were smart, if you were humble, if you were willing to admit that competence comes in forms you never expected, You spent the rest of your life grateful they appeared at all. Master Sergeant Joanna Merrick, callsign Wraith, teacher, warrior, ghost. The woman who walked into places where she did not belong and left them understanding that belonging was never about appearance. It was about capability, about courage, about the willingness to do hard things in hard ways because lives depended on it. She had learned that lesson in blood and fire, and mountains that held the bodies of people she could not save. Now she taught it to people who still had time to learn, still had chances to change, still had the gift of being wrong and surviving long enough to become right. That was her mission, her calling, her way of honoring the 11 faces in the photograph she carried everywhere but never looked at because she had memorized every detail years ago. The road went on. The mission continued. And somewhere ahead, another group of soldiers waited to learn that the quiet person in the corner might be the most dangerous person in the room. If you were wise enough to see it, humble enough to accept it, courageous enough to learn from it. And if you were not, you would learn anyway, the hard way, the way that left bruises and paint marks and wounded pride. But you would learn, because Master Sergeant Joanna Merrick did not accept failure, did not allow ignorance, did not tolerate assumptions that cost lives. She was the test you did not know you were taking, the standard you did not know existed, the lesson you needed but never asked for. She was the Wraith, and her doctrine was simple, clear, unforgiving. See what is there, not what you expect. Trust capability wherever you find it. Learn humility before arrogance kills you. Or pay the price in blood and regret, and the weight of knowing you could have done better if you had just been willing to look beyond your own certainty. The choice was always yours, the consequences were always permanent, and the teacher was always watching, waiting, ready to prove that assumptions were the most expensive mistakes anyone would ever make. She drove on, into sunset, into the next test, into the future where soldiers would live or die based on whether they learned to see clearly or remained blind to capability that did not match their expectations. The road had no end. The mission had no completion. The work would continue until the last soldier learned or the last ghost faded. Whichever came last. She suspected she knew which one it would be, but she kept driving anyway, because that was what you did when you carried the dead. You honored them with action. You turned grief into lessons. You made sure their sacrifice meant something beyond statistics and folded flags and cemetery stones that no one visited. You became the change. You taught the lesson. You refused to let the same mistakes be made again. Even if it took a lifetime, even if it cost everything, even if no one ever knew your name. You did the work because someone had to, and you had survived when others had not. That was the burden. That was the gift. That was the purpose that got you out of bed every morning and kept you moving forward when everything in you wanted to stop. Master Sergeant Joanna Merrick understood this, lived this, would die carrying this forward. Until then, she would keep appearing where she was not expected, keep teaching lessons that needed to be learned, keep proving that assumptions were expensive and humility was free. One facility at a time, one student at a time, one life saved at a time. The ghost walked among them, teaching, testing, transforming, and when she vanished, she left behind people who saw the world differently, who questioned their certainty, who looked beyond the surface and found capability in unexpected places. That was her legacy. That was her mission. That was the doctrine she carried forward in memory of 11 faces that smiled from a photograph she would never stop seeing. The Wraith doctrine, simple, true, permanent, see clearly, question assumptions, respect capability wherever it lives, Learn humility before arrogance destroys you. And if you forget, she will appear to remind you. Silent, sudden, undeniable, a ghost in the machine, a teacher in the darkness, a standard you never knew existed until you failed to meet it. Then you will understand, and you will be better, and lives will be saved because someone cared enough to teach you the hard way when the easy way would not take. That was the promise. That was the purpose. That was the reason she kept moving forward when the weight of the past tried to drag her down. Because the dead deserved better than silence. They deserved action. They deserved a world where their mistakes were learned from instead of repeated. And Joanna Merrick would give them that, or die trying, whichever came first. The road stretched on, the mission continued, and the ghost drove toward the next lesson, the next test, the next chance to honor the fallen by teaching the living. Forever, until the end, until the work was done, until every soldier understood that assumptions kill and humility saves and capability comes in forms you must learn to recognize. That was the doctrine, that was the truth, that was the legacy, and she would carry it forward until her last breath left her body or the last soldier learned to see clearly. The Wraith endured, the doctrine remained, and the lesson echoed forward into every future where soldiers would face enemies they did not expect and allies they did not recognize, where survival would depend on seeing beyond the surface, where life and death would be measured in the willingness to question certainty. She drove on, into distance, into purpose, into the endless work of teaching people to see what was really there instead of what they wanted to believe. The ghost in the machine, the lesson in the silence, the standard that made better warriors and saved lives and honored the dead through action instead of words. That was who she was. That was what she did. That was why she would never stop until the work was finished or she was. The doctrine lived, the mission continued, and somewhere ahead soldiers waited to learn, whether they knew it or not.